Sarah had been looking forward to this dinner for weeks. After 3 months of dating Marcus, she thought tonight would be special. He had chosen Romano's, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown, and insisted on making reservations for Friday night. She spent hours getting ready, choosing her favorite black dress and the pearl earrings her grandmother had given her. Marcus picked her up at 7 sharp, looking handsome in his navy suit. During the drive, he seemed different somehow. More confident, almost cocky. He talked about his recent promotion at the marketing firm and how his boss had praised his latest campaign. Sarah smiled and congratulated him, genuinely happy for his success. The restaurant was elegant, with dim lighting and soft jazz playing in the background. The hostess led them to a table near the window overlooking the city lights. Sarah felt a flutter of excitement, thinking Marcus might have something important to tell her tonight. Maybe he was ready to take their relationship to the next level. As they settled into their seats, Sarah noticed Marcus checking his phone frequently. She tried to make conversation about her week, telling him about the new project she was leading at the nonprofit where she worked. But Marcus seemed distracted, only offering short responses while scrolling through his messages. When the waiter approached to take their drink orders, Marcus suddenly became animated. He ordered an expensive bottle of wine without consulting. Sarah then launched into a detailed conversation with the waiter about the restaurant's wine selection. Sarah watched, puzzled by his sudden change in demeanor. The first red flag came when Marcus started talking loudly about his salary and recent bonus. Other diners began glancing in their direction as his voice carried across the restaurant. Sarah felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment, but when she gently suggested he lower his voice, Marcus laughed it off. Their appetizers arrived, and Marcus continued his boastful monologue. He talked about his expensive car, his luxury apartment, and the exclusive gym he had just joined. Sarah tried to steer the conversation toward more personal topics, asking about his family and his weekend plans, but Marcus seemed determined to showcase his material success. Halfway through the meal, Sarah realized that Marcus hadn't asked her a single question about herself all evening. Every topic somehow circled back to his achievements, his possessions, or his ambitious career plans. When she mentioned her recent volunteer work at the animal shelter, he barely acknowledged it before launching into another story about his work success. The evening took a strange turn when Marcus excused himself to use the restroom. While he was gone, Sarah noticed a man at the bar who kept glancing in her direction. He was tall, with kind eyes and a warm smile. When their eyes met, he nodded politely before turning back to his conversation with the bartender. When Marcus returned, he seemed even more energetic than before. He had apparently run into a college friend in the hallway and spent 10 minutes catching up. He regaled Sarah with stories about their fraternity days, speaking so loudly that the couple at the next table looked annoyed. Sarah began to feel increasingly uncomfortable. This wasn't the Marcus she had grown to care about over the past 3 months. That Marcus had been thoughtful and considerate, asking about her day and remembering details about her life. This version seemed like a completely different person, self-absorbed and inconsiderate. As the evening progressed, Marcus's behavior became more puzzling. He made jokes that weren't funny and laughed too loudly at his own stories. He criticized the food despite having eaten most of his meal, and he complained about the service even though their waiter had been attentive and professional. Sarah found herself looking around the restaurant, feeling embarrassed by association. The man at the bar caught her eye again, and this time she noticed he looked concerned. She wondered if her discomfort was that obvious to strangers. When dessert arrived, Marcus launched into yet another story about his college achievements. Sarah had heard this particular story twice before, but Marcus seemed to have forgotten. He spoke as if it were the first time he was sharing these details, complete with dramatic gestures and exaggerated expressions. The final straw came when Marcus began criticizing Sarah's career choice. He suggested that working for a nonprofit was cute, but not very practical for someone her age. He questioned whether she was really making a difference and hinted that she should consider switching to a more lucrative field like his. Sarah felt a surge of anger, but tried to remain calm. She had worked hard to get her position at the nonprofit, and she was passionate about the organization's mission. Her work helping underprivileged children access educational resources was meaningful to her, even if it didn't come with a six-figure salary. As Marcus continued his condescending commentary about her life choices, Sarah realized she was seeing him clearly for the first time. The considerate man she thought she knew had been replaced by someone arrogant and dismissive. She wondered if this was who he really was, or if his recent promotion had gone to his head. The restaurant was beginning to empty as other diners finished their meals and left. Sarah glanced at her watch and realized they had been there for over 2 hours. What should have been a romantic evening had turned into an endurance test. Marcus seemed oblivious to her growing discomfort. He continued talking about himself, occasionally pausing to take photos of his food to post on social media. He even asked the waiter to take a picture of them together, despite Sarah's obvious reluctance to pose. As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself making mental notes about all the ways Marcus had changed. His thoughtfulness had been replaced by self-centeredness. His genuine interest in her life had disappeared entirely. Even his sense of humor seemed different, meaner and more focused on putting others down rather than bringing joy to their conversation. She began to question everything about their relationship. Had she been blind to these qualities before, or was this truly a recent development? Either way, she realized she didn't like the person sitting across from her. The Marcus she had fallen for seemed to have vanished, replaced by someone she barely recognized. The man at the bar was still there, now reading a book while nursing what appeared to be his second drink. Something about his quiet presence felt comforting compared to Marcus's loud, attention-seeking behavior. Sarah found herself wishing she could trade places with someone having a peaceful, solitary evening rather than enduring this disappointing date. As Marcus signaled for the check, Sarah braced herself for what she sensed would be the evening's final act. Something in his expression suggested that he wasn't finished performing yet, and she had a sinking feeling that the worst was still to come. When the waiter brought the check, Marcus made a big show of examining it line by line. He held up the leather folder, squinting at the numbers as if he were solving a complex mathematical equation. Sarah watched in growing bewilderment as he shook his head and made disapproving clicking sounds with his tongue. "Excuse me?" Marcus called out loudly, waving the waiter over. The young man approached their table with a professional smile, clearly expecting to process their payment. Instead, Marcus launched into a detailed complaint about the prices. "This seems excessive for what we got," Marcus announced, his voice carrying across the now quiet restaurant. "The pasta was overcooked, the wine was room temperature, and frankly, the service has been subpar all evening." Sarah felt her face burn with embarrassment. Their server had been nothing but courteous and attentive throughout the meal. The food had been delicious, and the wine had been served at the proper temperature. She couldn't understand why Marcus was creating this scene. The waiter maintained his composure, apologizing politely and offering to speak with the manager. But Marcus wasn't finished. He began questioning individual charges on the bill, disputing the cost of items they had clearly ordered and consumed. Other diners were now openly staring at their table. "I think there's been a mistake," Marcus continued, his voice growing louder. "We shouldn't have to pay full price for this experience. I'm a regular customer at establishments much finer than this, and I know what quality service looks like." Sarah wanted to disappear into her chair. She glanced toward the bar and saw the man with the book watching the scene unfold with obvious concern. Their eyes met briefly, and she saw something like sympathy in his expression. She looked away quickly, mortified that a stranger was witnessing this humiliating display. The manager appeared at their table, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and kind eyes. She listened patiently as Marcus repeated his complaints, then offered a reasonable discount on their meal. But Marcus wasn't satisfied. He wanted the entire dinner comped, plus a certificate for a future visit. "I don't think you understand," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair with a smug expression. "I have influence in this city. I could write reviews that would seriously impact your business. My social media following alone could make or break a restaurant like this." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. The Marcus she had known for 3 months had never acted this entitled or demanding. He had always been polite to service workers and generous with tips. This behavior was completely out of character, or perhaps it revealed his true character for the first time. The manager remained professional, explaining that she had already offered a fair adjustment to their bill. Marcus's expression darkened, and Sarah could see he was preparing to escalate the situation further. She felt trapped, unsure whether to speak up or remain silent. "Fine," Marcus said finally, throwing his hands up dramatically. "I'll pay your inflated prices, but don't expect to see me or my friends here again. And you can be sure I'll be sharing my experience online." He pulled out his credit card and slammed it on the table with unnecessary force. The manager collected it gracefully and walked away to process the payment. Sarah sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. "Can you believe that?" Marcus said to Sarah, as if expecting her support. "The nerve of these people trying to overcharge customers who know better. It's a good thing I was here to keep them honest." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "Marcus, they weren't overcharging us. The prices were clearly listed on the menu, and the service was excellent. That poor waiter didn't deserve to be treated that way." Marcus waved dismissively. "You're too trusting, Sarah. These places take advantage of people who don't know how to stand up for themselves. I was protecting us from being ripped off." "Protecting us?" Sarah's voice rose slightly. "You were being rude and unreasonable. There was nothing wrong with our meal or the service." Marcus laughed condescendingly. "This is exactly what I was talking about earlier. You're too nice for your own good. In the real world, you have to be aggressive to get what you deserve. Maybe if you applied that mindset to your career, you'd be making real money instead of playing with charity work." Sarah felt a surge of anger unlike anything she had experienced in months. The dismissive way he referred to her meaningful work as playing was insulting beyond measure. Her job at the nonprofit had been her dream position, and she had worked incredibly hard to earn it. "My work isn't charity or playing," she said firmly. "I help children access educational opportunities that change their lives. Just because it doesn't pay as much as your job doesn't make it less valuable." Marcus shrugged. "Look, I'm just being honest. You're smart and attractive. You could be making 6 figures in corporate America instead of wasting your talents on feel-good projects that don't really matter in the long run." The manager returned with Marcus's credit card and the receipt. He signed it with an exaggerated flourish, making sure to write a conspicuously small tip. Sarah watched in horror as he calculated exactly 15%, despite having spent the evening complaining about service that had actually been exemplary. As they prepared to leave, Marcus stood up and made one final announcement to the restaurant. "Thank you for an educational evening," he said loudly. "I've learned a lot about what not to expect from supposedly upscale dining establishments." Sarah quickly gathered her purse and jacket, desperate to escape the scene. As they walked toward the exit, she could feel the eyes of other diners following them. She had never been so embarrassed in her life. The evening that was supposed to bring them closer together had instead revealed a side of Marcus that she found completely unappealing. At the door, Marcus paused to shake hands with the hostess, as if he were a celebrity leaving a premiere. He mentioned his social media following again and suggested she follow his accounts to see his upcoming reviews of local restaurants. The young woman smiled politely but looked relieved when they finally left. Outside the restaurant, Marcus seemed energized by the confrontation. He talked excitedly about how he had handled the situation and saved them money. He acted as if his behavior had been heroic rather than humiliating. Sarah walked beside him in silence, her mind racing. She thought about all the times over the past 3 months when Marcus had seemed considerate and thoughtful. Had those moments been genuine, or had he been putting on an act? Either way, tonight had shown her a side of him that she couldn't ignore or excuse. As they approached his car, Marcus continued his post-dinner analysis, critiquing everything from the restaurant's decor to the other customers' fashion choices. Sarah realized that his negativity extended far beyond the dinner experience. He seemed to find fault with everything and everyone around him, while positioning himself as superior and more sophisticated than everyone else. The ride home stretched ahead of them, and Sarah dreaded being trapped in the car with Marcus for another 20 minutes. She wondered how she was going to handle the rest of the evening and, more importantly, how she was going to handle their relationship going forward. The car ride started in tense silence. Marcus was still energized from his confrontation at the restaurant, occasionally chuckling to himself about how he had put them in their place. Sarah stared out the passenger window, watching the city. Lights blur past as she tried to process the evening's events. "You know what your problem is, Sarah?" Marcus said suddenly, breaking the silence. His tone was casual, as if he were about to offer friendly advice rather than criticism. "You let people walk all over you. That's why you're stuck in that dead-end nonprofit job instead of making real money." Sarah turned to look at him, surprised by the unprovoked attack. "My job isn't dead-end, Marcus. I love what I do, and I'm good at it. Not everything is about money." Marcus laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive in the enclosed car. "That's what people say when they're afraid to compete in the real world. You're smart enough to succeed in business, but you're hiding behind this do-gooder image because it's safe." "I'm not hiding behind anything," Sarah replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I chose my career because I want to make a difference. I help kids who wouldn't otherwise have access to educational programs. That matters to me. But does it matter to anyone else?" Marcus asked, glancing at her with a smirk. "I mean, really, how much difference are you actually making? Are you changing the world, or are you just making yourself feel better about not pursuing a real career?" Sarah felt her chest tighten with anger and hurt. 3 months ago, Marcus had told her how much he admired her dedication to helping others. He had said her compassion was one of the things that attracted him to her. Now he was using her career choice as ammunition to tear her down. "Why are you being so cruel?" she asked quietly. "You never talked to me like this before." Marcus shrugged, keeping his eyes on the road. "I'm not being cruel. I'm being honest. Someone needs to tell you these things. Your friends probably just tell you what you want to hear. But I care enough about you to be real." "This isn't caring, Marcus. This is being mean for no reason." "Look," Marcus said, his tone becoming more condescending. "I know it's hard to hear, but you need to face reality. You're 32 years old and you're basically a glorified volunteer. What's your plan for the future? Are you going to live in that tiny apartment forever, driving that beat-up Honda and pretending you're saving the world?" Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Her apartment might be small, but it was cozy and she had decorated it herself. Her Honda was reliable and paid off. She wasn't ashamed of her lifestyle, even if it wasn't as flashy as Marcus's. "There's nothing wrong with my apartment or my car," she said firmly. "I'm happy with my life." "Are you, though?" Marcus pressed. "Really? Don't you want more? Don't you want to travel to nice places, wear designer clothes, eat at restaurants, where you don't have to worry about the prices?" "I can afford to eat out, Marcus. And I do travel. Maybe not to 5-star resorts, but I've seen plenty of beautiful places." "Money isn't everything." Marcus made another dismissive sound. "That's what poor people say to make themselves feel better about being poor." The comment hit Sarah like a slap. She wasn't poor. She made a decent salary and managed her finances responsibly. She had savings, a retirement account, and enough money to enjoy life within her means. Marcus was deliberately trying to make her feel inadequate, and she couldn't understand why. They stopped at a red light, and in the brief silence, Sarah found herself thinking about the man at the restaurant bar. He had been quietly reading, content with his own company, radiating a sense of peace that felt foreign after spending the evening with Marcus's aggressive energy. She wondered what it would be like to have dinner with someone who didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. "You're being awfully quiet over there," Marcus said as the light turned green. "Are you thinking about what I said? Because I really do think you could do better for yourself if you tried." "I'm thinking about how different you seem tonight," Sarah replied honestly. "I don't recognize the person you're being right now." Marcus glanced at her with surprise. "What do you mean? I'm the same person I've always been. Maybe you're just seeing me more clearly now that we're getting serious." "Serious?" Sarah repeated. "Is that what this is?" "Well, yeah," Marcus said, sounding genuinely confused by her tone. "I mean, we've been dating for 3 months. I figured it was time to be more honest with each other about our expectations and goals." "So your idea of honesty is insulting my career and my lifestyle?" "I'm not insulting anything. I'm trying to help you see your potential. You could be so much more than what you are right now." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "What I am right now is someone who helps children, owns her own home, pays her bills, and contributes to her community. If that's not enough for you, then maybe we're not as compatible as I thought." Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Sarah hoped she had finally gotten through to him. But when he spoke again, his tone was even more condescending than before. "Sarah, you're taking this all wrong. I'm trying to motivate you to be better. When you care about someone, you push them to reach their full potential. I see so much more in you than you see in yourself. What you see is someone you think you can change to fit your idea of what I should be," Sarah replied. "But I don't want to change. I like who I am." "That's your problem right there," Marcus said, shaking his head. "You're too comfortable with mediocrity. Successful people are never satisfied with good enough." They were approaching Sarah's neighborhood now, and she felt a mix of relief and dread. Relief that the car ride was almost over, but dread about how the evening would end. She had been planning to invite Marcus up to her apartment, maybe make coffee and talk about their future together. Now she just wanted him to drop her off and leave. "You know what I think?" Marcus continued, apparently oblivious to her withdrawal. "I think deep down, you know I'm right. You're just scared to admit it because change is hard. But I could help you. I have connections in the business world. I could introduce you to people who could get you a real job." "I have a real job," Sarah said firmly. "And I don't need you to rescue me from my life." "Everyone needs help sometimes," Marcus replied. "There's no shame in admitting that you've made some mistakes and want to do better." Sarah felt her remaining patience evaporate. "The only mistake I made was thinking you actually cared about me as a person instead of seeing me as a project to fix." Marcus pulled into her driveway and put the car in park. He turned to face her with an expression of exaggerated patience, like a parent dealing with a stubborn child. "Sarah, I do care about you. That's exactly why I'm having this conversation. If I didn't care, I'd just let you stay stuck where you are. But I see your potential, and I want to help you realize it." Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt and reached for the door handle. "Thank you for dinner, Marcus. I think I need some time to think about everything you've said tonight." "Wait," Marcus said, reaching out to touch her arm. "You're not seriously upset about this, are you? I thought we could go upstairs and continue talking. Maybe I could show you some job listings I've been saving for you." Sarah paused with her hand on the door handle. The fact that he had been collecting job listings for her without asking felt like another violation of her autonomy. He really did see her as a project rather than a partner. "I think it's better if you go home tonight," she said quietly. "I'll call you tomorrow." Marcus looked genuinely surprised by her reaction. "Sarah, you're being way too sensitive about this. I was trying to help you, She got out of the car without responding and walked toward her front door. Behind her, she could hear Marcus calling her name, but she didn't turn around. She fumbled with her keys, desperate to get inside and away from his voice. As she finally got her door open, she heard his car door slam and his footsteps on her walkway. She turned around to find him approaching with a frustrated expression. "We need to finish this conversation," he said firmly. "You can't just run away every time someone tells you something you don't want to hear." Sarah stood in her doorway, keys in hand, looking at Marcus with a mixture of exhaustion and growing clarity. The porch light cast harsh shadows across his face, making his frustrated expression look almost menacing. She had never noticed how cold his eyes could be when he wasn't getting his way. "I'm not running away from anything, Marcus," she said calmly. "I'm choosing not to continue a conversation that's going nowhere. You've made your feelings about my life very clear tonight." Marcus stepped closer, his voice taking on the same patronizing tone he had used all evening. "Sarah, you're being dramatic. I'm trying to have an adult conversation about our future together, and you're acting like a child who doesn't want to hear constructive criticism." "Constructive criticism?" Sarah repeated, her voice rising slightly. "You spent the entire evening insulting me, embarrassing me in public, and telling me everything that's wrong with my life. There was nothing constructive about any of it." "I was being honest," Marcus insisted. "Isn't that what relationships are supposed to be about? Honesty? I thought you were mature enough to handle some straight talk about your choices." Sarah felt something shift inside her as she listened to his words. For months, she had been making excuses for his occasional sharp comments, attributing them to work stress or bad days. But tonight had shown her a pattern she could no longer ignore. Marcus didn't respect her choices, her career, or apparently her feelings. "You want to know what I think honesty looks like in a relationship?" she said, her voice steadier now. "It looks like supporting each other's dreams, not tearing them down. It looks like treating your partner with respect, especially in public. It looks like caring about someone's happiness more than your need to be right." Marcus rolled his eyes. "Spare me the Disney princess version of relationships, Sarah. Real partnerships are about pushing each other to be better. If you can't handle someone caring enough to tell you the truth, then maybe you're not ready for a serious relationship." "You're not telling me the truth, Marcus. You're projecting your values onto my life and deciding that anything different from what you want must be wrong. That's not caring. That's controlling." "Controlling?" Marcus laughed harshly. "I'm trying to help you succeed. How is that controlling?" "Because you're not listening to what I actually want," Sarah explained, surprised by how clear her thoughts had become. "I never asked for your help finding a new job. I never complained about my salary or my apartment or my car. You decided those things were problems that needed fixing without ever asking me how I felt about my own life." Marcus shook his head impatiently. "Sometimes people don't know what's best for them. Sometimes it takes an outside perspective to see the bigger picture." "And you think you're qualified to make those decisions for me?" "I think I know more about success than someone who's content to make $30,000 a year helping kids with their homework," Marcus snapped, his facade of patience finally cracking completely. Sarah felt the comment hit her like a physical blow. Her salary was actually significantly higher than $30,000, but more importantly, her work involved developing and implementing educational programs that had measurably improved outcomes for hundreds of children. The dismissive way he characterized her career revealed just how little he actually knew or cared about what she did. "You have no idea what my job actually involves," she said quietly. "You've never asked for details, and you clearly haven't been listening when I've tried to share them with you." "I've listened," Marcus protested. "I've heard all about your little programs and your success stories. It's very sweet, but it's not going to build you a real future." "According to who? According to you? You've decided what my future should look like without bothering to ask what I want it to look like." Marcus ran his hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "Sarah, I make six figures. I have a corner office, a luxury car, and a penthouse apartment. I can afford to take you places you've never dreamed of going. I can introduce you to people who could transform your career. Why would you choose struggle when you could choose success? Because my version of success doesn't look like yours, Sarah replied. And the fact that you can't understand or respect that tells me everything I need to know about how you really see me. How I see you is as someone with unrealized potential, Marcus said, his tone becoming almost pleading. I see someone who could have everything she wants if she just stopped settling for less. What if what I want is exactly what I already have? Sarah asked. What if I'm not settling, but choosing? What if my life makes me happy, even if it doesn't make you happy? Marcus stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him struggling to process her words. It seemed genuinely difficult for him to comprehend that someone might have different priorities and values than his own. I don't understand you, he said finally. I'm offering you everything. A better life, financial, security, social status. Why would you choose to stay stuck where you are? Because I'm not stuck, Sarah said simply. I'm exactly where I want to be, doing work that matters to me, living according to my own values. The only thing that's been missing is a partner who respects and supports those choices. And you don't think I can be that partner? Sarah looked at him carefully, searching for any sign of genuine understanding or willingness to change. But his posture remained defensive, his expression frustrated rather than reflective. Even now, he seemed more concerned with winning the argument than with understanding her perspective. I think you want to be with a version of me that doesn't exist, she said honestly. You want someone who shares your priorities and your definition of success, but that's not who I am, and I don't want to become that person. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Sarah hoped he might finally be hearing her. But when he spoke again, his tone was dismissive. Fine, he said, throwing up his hands. If you want to waste your potential and stay stuck in your little bubble, that's your choice. But don't expect me to pretend I think it's a good decision. I don't expect anything from you anymore, Marcus, Sarah replied, feeling a strange sense of relief as she said the words. I think we want very different things, from life and from each other. So that's it? Marcus asked, his voice sharp with disbelief. You're going to throw away 3 months because I dared to suggest you could do better for yourself? I'm not throwing anything away, Sarah said calmly. I'm choosing not to continue a relationship with someone who doesn't respect me or my choices. There's a difference. Marcus stared at her for another long moment, his expression cycling through anger, confusion, and something that might have been hurt. Finally, he shook his head and took a step back. You know what, Sarah? Maybe you're right. Maybe we do want different things. Maybe I do need someone with more ambition and drive. Someone who understands what it takes to build a real life in the real world. I hope you find that person, Sarah said sincerely, and I hope she makes you happy. Marcus turned and walked back toward his car without another word. Sarah watched him go, feeling emotionally drained but also oddly peaceful. As his taillights disappeared down her street, she realized that the man she thought she had been falling for had never really existed. The real Marcus had finally shown himself tonight, and she was grateful to have seen the truth before investing any more time in their relationship. She went inside and locked the door behind her, then leaned against it for a moment, processing everything that had happened. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and she expected it to be from Marcus, but it was from her best friend asking how the dinner had gone. Sarah stared at the message, wondering how to even begin explaining the evening's events. Instead of responding, immediately, she made herself a cup of tea and settled into her favorite chair by the window. Tomorrow, she would tell her friend everything, but tonight she just wanted to sit quietly and appreciate the peace of her own space. 2 weeks had passed since the disastrous dinner with Marcus, and Sarah was surprised by how quickly she had adjusted to being single again. The relief she felt confirmed that ending their relationship had been the right decision. She threw herself into her work with renewed energy, finding joy in projects that Marcus would have dismissed as insignificant. On a Thursday evening, Sarah decided to treat herself to dinner at a small bistro near her office. She had discovered the place recently and loved its cozy atmosphere and excellent pasta. As she settled into a corner table with a book, she felt grateful for the simple pleasure of dining alone without judgment or criticism. She was halfway through her meal when she noticed a familiar figure at the bar. It took her a moment to place him, but then she remembered. It was the man from Romano's, the one who had been quietly reading while Marcus created his scene. He was alone again, this time working on a laptop while nursing a glass of wine. Sarah found herself curious about him. There had been something calming about his presence that night, a stark contrast to Marcus's aggressive energy. She wondered what he did for work, what he was reading, whether he remembered the uncomfortable scene he had witnessed. As if sensing her gaze, the man looked up from his laptop and their eyes met. He smiled politely, the same warm expression she remembered from 2 weeks ago. After a moment's hesitation, he closed his laptop and walked over to her table. "I hope you don't mind me saying this," he said, his voice gentle and thoughtful, "but I was at Romano's a couple of weeks ago, and I couldn't help but notice you seemed to be having a difficult evening. I've been hoping you were okay." Sarah felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment, remembering how public Marcus's behavior had been. "That's very kind of you to ask, and yes, I'm much better now, thank you." "I'm David," he said, extending his hand, "and I promise I'm not in the habit of approaching strangers in restaurants. Well, you looked so uncomfortable that night, and I've thought about it several times since then. I'm glad to see you seem happier now." "I'm Sarah," she replied, shaking his hand and gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "Would you like to sit down? I have to admit, I'm curious about you too. You seemed like the only peaceful person in that whole restaurant." David accepted her invitation, settling into the chair with an easy grace that reminded her of how different people could be in their approach to the world. Where Marcus had always seemed to be performing, David appeared genuinely comfortable in his own skin. "I was actually supposed to meet a friend that night," David explained, "but he canceled at the last minute. I decided to stay and have dinner anyway. I'm glad I did, though I'm sorry you had such an unpleasant experience." "It turned out to be a blessing in disguise," Sarah said, surprising herself with her honesty. "That evening showed me some things I needed to see about my boyfriend. Well, my ex-boyfriend now." David nodded understanding without pressing for details. "Sometimes the most difficult experiences teach us the most important lessons." Sarah appreciated that he didn't pry or ask intrusive questions about what had happened. Instead, he seemed content to let her share what she felt comfortable sharing. It was refreshing after months of Marcus's tendency to push and probe until he got the answers he wanted. "What were you working on?" Sarah asked, nodding toward his laptop at the bar. "I'm a freelance writer," David explained. "I was editing an article about urban community gardens. Not the most exciting topic, perhaps, but I find it fascinating how people create these pockets of nature and collaboration in the middle of busy cities." Sarah's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "That sounds wonderful. I work with a nonprofit that helps kids access educational programs, and we've been thinking about incorporating gardening projects into our curriculum. There's so much research showing how hands-on learning improves engagement." "Really?" David leaned forward, his face animated with enthusiasm. "That's exactly the kind of program I was writing about. There's a school in Detroit that started a rooftop garden, and the kids who participate have shown significant improvements in science scores and overall school engagement." For the next hour, they talked about education, community development, and the small ways individuals could make meaningful differences in their neighborhoods. Sarah found herself energized by David's passion for topics that Marcus had dismissed as unimportant. David asked thoughtful questions about her work and seemed genuinely interested in her answers. I have to confess something, David said as they finished their meals. I've been coming to this neighborhood more often since that night at Romano's, hoping I might run into you again. I wanted to make sure you were all right, but I also found myself curious about someone who clearly had such strong principles. What made you think I had strong principles? Sarah asked, genuinely curious. The way you carried yourself that night, David replied. Even when things were clearly going badly, you maintained your dignity. You didn't create a scene or lash out. You just quietly endured what must have been a very embarrassing situation. That takes character. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the wine she had been sipping. When was the last time someone had complimented her character rather than her appearance or potential for change? I kept thinking about you too, she admitted. You seemed so peaceful, just reading your book and minding your own business. It made me realize how chaotic my life had become. Chaos has a way of teaching us what we really value, David observed. Sometimes we need contrast to appreciate what we actually want. As the evening progressed, Sarah learned that David lived in a converted loft a few blocks away, where he worked from home and tended a small balcony garden. He volunteered at a literacy center on weekends and spent his free time reading, hiking, and exploring local farmers markets. His life sounded simple but rich with purpose and contentment. You know what I love most about freelance writing? David said as they prepared to leave. I get to learn about so many different subjects and meet people who are passionate about what they do. Like you. I can tell how much you care about helping those kids. It's written all over your face when you talk about your work. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, remembering how Marcus had mocked her passion and suggested she was wasting her talents. Thank you for saying that. It means a lot to hear someone understand why I do what I do. Anyone who doesn't see the value in helping children reach their potential probably doesn't deserve your time, David said gently. They exchanged phone numbers as they parted ways outside the restaurant. David didn't pressure her for immediate plans or try to monopolize her schedule. Instead, he simply said he hoped they could continue their conversation soon, perhaps over coffee or a walk in the park. Walking home, Sarah reflected on how different the evening had been from her disaster at Romano's. David had been interested in her thoughts and opinions. He had shared his own passions without trying to prove his superiority. He had treated her as an equal rather than a project to be improved. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a lightness she hadn't felt in months. She had a text from David thanking her for the lovely evening and mentioning an article about urban education he thought she might find interesting. There was no demand for an immediate response, no pressure to make plans, just a thoughtful gesture that showed he had been listening to their conversation. As she got ready for work, Sarah realized that meeting David had shown her something important about relationships. For months with Marcus, she had been trying to prove she was worth loving, accepting his criticism and trying to change herself to meet his standards. But David seemed to appreciate her exactly as she was. She thought about Marcus's claims that she was settling for mediocrity, that she lacked ambition and drive. But sitting across from David, discussing work they both found meaningful, she had felt anything but mediocre. She had felt valued, respected, and understood. Her phone rang as she was having breakfast, and she was surprised to see Marcus's name on the screen. She had blocked his number after several unpleasant text messages following their breakup, but he was calling from a different number. "Sarah, we need to talk," his voice said when she answered, sounding urgent and slightly desperate. "I don't think we do, Marcus," she replied calmly. "We said everything that needed to be said 2 weeks ago. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I realize I may have come across wrong that night. I was having a stressful week at work, and I think I took it out on you. That wasn't fair." Sarah almost laughed at his version of an apology. Even now, he was making excuses for his behavior rather than taking genuine responsibility for it. "I appreciate you calling," she said diplomatically, "but I've moved on. I think we both want different things from life and from relationships." Give me another chance, Sarah. I can do better. I realize now how important your work is to you, and I want to support that. Maybe we could visit some of the programs you work with so I can understand better what you do. The offer sounded hollow to Sarah, like another attempt to manage and control, rather than genuinely understand. She thought about David's immediate interest in her work, how he had connected it to his own experiences and shared relevant knowledge. That was what genuine support looked like. I think it's better if we both move forward. 6 months later, Sarah sat in the same corner booth at Romano's, where her relationship with Marcus had imploded so spectacularly. This time, however, she was there with David, celebrating her recent promotion to program director at the nonprofit. The irony of the location wasn't lost on either of them. "Are you sure you're comfortable being here?" David asked, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "We could have gone anywhere to celebrate," Sarah smiled, looking around the elegant restaurant that had once been the scene of such humiliation. "Actually, I think it's perfect. This place represents such a turning point for me. It's where I learned to trust my instincts about what I want from life and from love." The evening couldn't have been more different from her last visit. David had made a reservation weeks in advance when she had mentioned being considered for the promotion. He had brought a small bouquet of flowers. From his balcony garden, not expensive roses, but herbs and wildflowers that he had grown himself. The personal touch meant more to her than any costly gesture could have. Their conversation flowed naturally between her new responsibilities at work, David's latest writing project about sustainable communities, and their shared excitement about a weekend trip they were planning to visit a farm-to-table restaurant in the countryside. David listened intently as she described her vision for expanding the nonprofit's programs, offering thoughtful questions and genuine enthusiasm for her. "Goals, I'm so proud of you," David said as they toasted with glasses of wine. "You've worked incredibly hard for this promotion, and they couldn't have chosen anyone better for the position." Sarah felt her heart swell with gratitude and love. Over the past 6 months, David had been nothing but supportive of her career, often working late into the evening so he could attend her program presentations or volunteer events. He had become genuinely interested in her work, not because he wanted to change or manage it, but because he cared about what mattered to her. Their relationship had developed slowly and naturally, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than physical attraction alone. David had never once suggested that she change her career, her apartment, or her lifestyle. Instead, he had found ways to integrate their lives that honored both of their independence and their growing commitment to each other. "You know what's funny?" Sarah said, cutting into her perfectly prepared salmon. "Marcus always said I was settling for mediocrity, but I've never felt more successful or fulfilled than I do right now." "That's because you're living according to your own definition of success," David replied. "True success isn't about impressing other people or meeting someone else's standards. It's about creating a life that reflects your values and makes you happy." Sarah nodded, thinking about how much she had grown over the past months. The promotion had come with a significant salary increase, which she had used not to upgrade her lifestyle dramatically, but to increase her charitable giving and start a small emergency fund. She had also begun taking art classes in the evenings, something she had always wanted to do but had never made time for during her relationship with Marcus. "I ran into Marcus last week," Sarah mentioned casually, watching David's reaction. She wasn't surprised when he simply nodded calmly, without jealousy or insecurity. "How did that go?" he asked. "Better than I expected, actually. He's dating someone new, a marketing executive who apparently shares his ambitions for wealth and status. He seemed happy, which I'm genuinely glad about. I think we both found people who are better matches for what we want from life." David smiled. "That's the best possible outcome. Sometimes relationships don't work out not because anyone is wrong or bad, but because people simply want different things." Sarah appreciated David's mature perspective on her past relationship. He had never badmouthed Marcus or tried to position himself as superior in comparison. Instead, he had simply shown her through his actions what a healthy, supportive partnership could look like. As they finished their meal, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The humiliating dinner with Marcus had been painful at the time, but it had ultimately led her to clarify her own values and standards. It had given her the courage to end a relationship that wasn't serving her, and it had prepared her to recognize and appreciate the right person when he came along. "I have something for you," David said, pulling a small wrapped package from his jacket pocket. "It's not much, but I saw it and thought of you." Sarah unwrapped the gift to find a small leather journal with her initials embossed on the cover. Inside the front cover, David had written, "For all the stories you'll help children write about their futures. With love and admiration, David." "It's perfect," Sarah said, feeling tears of happiness prick her eyes. "How did you know I was thinking about starting a journal to track the kids' progress in our new programs?" "Because I pay attention to you," David said simply. "I listen when you talk about your dreams and plans. That's what people who love each other do." The simple statement carried more weight than any grand romantic gesture could have. David's love was demonstrated not through expensive gifts or dramatic declarations, but through consistent attention, respect, and support for who she was and what she cared about. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Sarah looked around one more. Time at the place where her old life had ended and her new one had begun. She thought about the woman who had sat at a different table 6 months ago, trying to convince herself that Marcus's criticism came from love, accepting treatment that made her feel small and inadequate. That woman seemed like a stranger now. The Sarah who was leaving Romano's tonight knew her own worth. She had work that fulfilled her, a partner who cherished her exactly as she was, and a clear vision of the future she wanted to build. She had learned the difference between someone who wanted to change her and someone who wanted to grow alongside her. Outside the restaurant, David offered her his arm as they walked to his car. "So, what's next for the newly promoted program, Director?" he asked playfully. "Well," Sarah said, leaning into his warmth, "I was thinking we could go home and I could show you the plans I've been working on for the new after-school initiative. And maybe you could tell me about that article you're writing about community resilience." "That sounds perfect," David replied, opening the car door for her. "Though I should warn you, I might fall asleep listening to you talk about educational theory. I find your voice very soothing." Sarah laughed, feeling lighter and happier than she had in years. As they drove through the city toward David's loft, she realized that this was what real love felt like. Comfortable, supportive, and built on genuine appreciation for each other's authentic selves. The woman who had been humiliated at Romano's 6 months ago would hardly recognize the confident, fulfilled person she had become. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, the most painful experiences led to the most beautiful transformations. Her disastrous dinner with Marcus had been the catalyst for everything good that had followed, including the quiet, steady love she had found with David. As they pulled into David's driveway, Sarah smiled to herself, grateful for the journey that had brought her here. Tomorrow, she would start her new position, working with an expanded team to help even more children reach their potential. Tonight, she would fall asleep in the arms of a man who loved and respected her exactly as she was. The humiliation had transformed into triumph. The ending had become a beginning. And the woman who had once doubted her own worth had discovered just how much she deserved to be cherished. Sometimes the best revenge against those who underestimate you is simply living well, loving authentically, and staying true to your own vision of success.